Is Seele back? Kinda, but not really at the same time. Well, let's go over what changed first. They increased the multipliers a ton on both her skill and ultimate, and also included this pretty cool effect on the skill. If the enemy is attacked by an ally at 50% HP or lower, Seele will then automatically use her skill on it once. If the enemy is defeated before that, it will just target a random lower HP enemy. This only activates once per turn and doesn't consume skill points, nor does it regenerate energy, but it can activate Resurgence. So if you defeat 2 enemies in a row, you can actually get double Resurgence. So at the very least 4 actions, and if you add your ultimate to it, 6 actions in a row, and if you add Cerebra to it, you can go even higher. But speaking of Resurgence, it's now for 3 turns, so it's quite easy to have higher uptime on this, and the previous user's bonus ability was changed to increasing her damage by 50% for each kill, up to 3 times, and then it lasts for 3 turns. So if you're constantly defeating enemies like in Pure Fiction or certain stages, you can now get a total of 230% damage boost. There's one other small change, but for some reason isn't here, but it seems they also increased the rest pen during Resurgence from 20 to 25%. And the last base kit change is her technique. It was useful for extending the Resurgence uptime. Now it also deals her skill damage once to a random enemy and is guaranteed to crit. It doesn't do a whole lot though, because Seele doesn't have any buffs at this point in the battle. It would be much better if it was every wave, but yeah, it is what it is. So instead of reworking the kit entirely, Hoyo has kept Seele's identity and in fact doubled down on it. She's still super reliant on defeating enemies, so enemies ideally need to have lower HP, but at the same time they increased her total multipliers by a crazy amount on top of the huge damage boost, right? As a result, she's kind of in the same spot earlier, but just much better. She needs the enemies to summon extra weaker mobs, or the waves need to start out at 5 enemies. So I didn't really want to use a super best case scenario or whatever to calculate her damage, so I'm using 3 targets with 1 weaker mob and 2 pretty tanky elites, about 2 to 3 million HP, so similar to Ashville's rotation. She goes from a very sad 11,000 TPV to about 34,000. It is a big boost, right? But it's not like she's good against tanky elites still. 34,000 is quite far behind any of the top tier 3 target meta teams. We are just about reaching 90 to 100k now, and they don't even need one of the mobs to be low HP or anything. So compared to Ashville in this kind of scenarios, Ashville is still really far ahead of her, but if you do give Seele her best case scenario, she can hit 90,000 DPV. Then if you give her the worst case, all the way back down to 12,000 again. Simultaneously the best hunt unit in the game, or the worst. I guess that's why she's Quantum, right? Yeah, so Seele still has one of the biggest ranges in the game between her damage ceiling and her floor, and she kinda requires certain scenarios or bosses to really do good. Like bosses who can summon extra mobs are usually pretty good, so Nikados, the one I did my Zero Cycle on, Flame Reaver, Abundant Deer, Cocolia, Swarm, and if really good or have extra investment, probably even Hule, Ligers, and the Eco Member Sprite. But again, just like with Ashville, I wouldn't say it's that Seele is bad. More like there really isn't good content to test her out on other than Nikados and Pure Fiction. The only other stage is Flame Reaver, but it starts out with 2 very tanky elites, so Seele can't really do much before she reaches the better scenario, so that's kinda rough as well. She is for sure way more niche than others, that is definitely true, but there are quite a few specific stages that she can perform on the same level as top tier teams. So if you rate her lower due to her being more niche, I think that's completely fair, right? But I think it's also important to take into account her damage ceiling against the many different bosses I mentioned earlier, and also higher target stages that we can get. The other pretty annoying things in the kit that I don't like is that Resurgence does not carry over into new waves, but you kinda just lose one action or a lot in Pure Fiction, and that could have been easily fixed and also maybe a bit more nitpicky, but rather than Seele having to defeat the enemy, maybe it would be better if it was phrased as the enemy is defeated after the attack or something like that, because you can run into really rare cases where the additional damage from like Robin can actually steal the kill from Seele, and then she doesn't proc Resurgence. Both of this would cover off rarer cases for Seele, it's more quality of life focus, but I think it would still have been great changes for her that they didn't include. It now feels more like she's a pocket pick that you can pull out when we get those best case stages, and then Seele can really cook, right? But her consistency isn't good enough to clear most content in the game, which I think is completely fine now, since she is technically a free unit in the 50-50 pool. So if you randomly get her, you can wait for a good stage and then you can completely fry it. Anyways, the last few changes in the kit are her E1 and E6. E1 adds 20% defense ignore, and then E6 increases the debuff duration to 3 turns, just like with Resurgence. and doubles the ultimate damage dealt, and then converts it from additional damage to true damage. So what it should do is, it should go through damage reduction, otherwise the same as before. I don't like conditional crit rate on the E1, especially since Seele's hit split for ultimate is 1, so if you miss the crit, and you just lose a ton of damage, kind of like Archer's skill. It would have been much better if it was unconditional, then it would have much higher value. E6 is really good though, because it helps you deal a lot more consistent damage, which is the biggest weakness of the kit, right? Also, because you defeat the same 2 to 3 million HP elites faster, Seele can get more resurgence, and with the extra speed buff from E2, it's super easy to get 4 turns with Dance Sparkle and the basic attacks, and then the extra energy from E4 can also give her more ultimates. Combined, Seele's E6 is actually really good at about 78,000 DPV in the same 3 target scenario thing. This is obviously really expensive, but it is a lot more possible to hit because she's 50-50 rather than being a limited 5-star, right? Now for builds, it did change a little bit, so let's update it real quick. Firstly, for light cones, Archer's S1 is the new best in slot. It looks quite close here, but I'm actually using a team of Seredra, Sparkle and Dunheng, so that's a ton of extra attack that Seele is already getting, and then Archer's S1 can still beat out the alternatives with its 80% attack boost. In a different team, like maybe Sunday or RMC or Tingyun, Archer's S1 should then widen the gap. Seele's S1 is the closest, but it requires the 160 speed, so it limits some team building. Even then, it's still not great compared to modern signature light cones. The rest are pretty close to one another, ranging from 86 to 92%. For Pain Ornaments, it is mostly the same other than for Archer S1. Previously, if you could hit 160 speed, Glamour was just the better choice. But now, because Seele can use her skill so much more frequently, it actually makes up quite a big portion of overall damage. Combined with Archer's S1 that can give you up to 80% attack, it actually diminishes the 12% from Glamour. So if you are using Archer S1 and this particular team that already gives you a ton of attack, Rutiden is actually better. But conversely, if you don't already have a ton of attack pass for her, like Tingyun, RMC Sparkle for example, Attack Op should perform the best even with Archer S1 because she can already give herself 230% damage boost. Just like Asheville, we're kinda dancing on the line between attack and damage, and it's completely dependent on your team setup and investment. Basically, if you already have too much attack, you go for damage boost. If you have too little attack, then you go for more attack. Now for teammates, not a lot changed other than Seredra being even better for Seele now. I mean, she could be used before, right? But now you add the extra skill and you can proc Resurgence more reliably, which means Seredra can give you a lot more consistent damage that Seele would otherwise be lacking versus tougher stages. Everything else is pretty much the same. I think teams with Sparkle will usually just be better though, because it can sometimes give you the leeway or flexibility, I guess, to go for 4 turns instead of being fixed to a rotation like with Sunday. It's really hard to say what the best team for Seele is in general, because it really depends on whether she can proc Resurgence to begin with. I think unfortunately we just have to trial and error on different stages. But I believe her 3 best teammates should be Sparkle, Seredra and RMC, and then you just use a mix of them usually. And that's pretty much it for this updated Novaflare Seele guide. Thanks for watching and see you.